I received the termination email while I was still at home, with the last line of code from the final update on my computer screen. 5 years of work, endless nights, and the system I created from scratch were now just part of an attachment, with no mention of my name. My name is Ethan, and if you had met me a few years ago, you would have seen someone who got lost in the lines of code, in the algorithms, in the invisible world where logic and creativity blend. I'm 36 years old. I live in Colorado, a cold yet welcoming place that has always given me space to breathe and create. For 5 years, I was the invisible brain behind a startup that, without my knowledge, would become the dream of Silicon Valley. But don't be fooled. This story, which could have been about innovation and recognition, is actually about betrayal, forgetfulness, and, in the end, justice. I created the system. I was the one who made it all happen. But in the end, I was the one whose name was erased from history. It was a day like any other. The office was simple but modern. Glass, concrete, and computers scattered across all the desks. I was in my zone as usual, my mind full of ideas. I had been immersed in that project for months alone. Of course, there were the other 3 partners, Mark, Dylan, and Jane. But in practice, I was the only one who really knew how to write code. They were the visionaries, the leaders, but no one understood the system like I did. Mark always had a grand vision. He was the kind of person who could see the future, and his ideas were always one step ahead, with an almost contagious energy. But there was something about him that bothered me. Mark was manipulative in a subtle way. He knew how to say the right words at the right moment, how to convince people that he was the brilliant mind behind everything. Dylan was the other side of the coin. Charismatic, outgoing, he knew how to captivate anyone in the room. At first, I thought he was the only one who really understood me. He would spend hours talking with me about the company's future, about how our platform would be revolutionary. He even called me the code genius, but there was always a slight irony in his tone, as if he knew something I didn't. "You'll see, Ethan," he would say with that confident smile. "Our product is going to be a success, and you'll be the one responsible for it." At the time, those words made me feel special, important. I thought I had found my place in the world, surrounded by people who truly understood the greatness of what we were creating. "We're going to grow, Ethan," Mark would say, always with that ambitious look. "You and I are going to be partners. We'll share the recognition equally. After all, without your code, none of this would be possible." I believed him. I think we all did. But I should have been suspicious when he used the word equally. Nothing in life is equal, and I should have learned that sooner. There was something more to my role there that no one else saw. When Mark and Dylan talked about business, about investment and fundraising, I was behind the computer screen creating, perfecting, turning vague ideas into something concrete. The system we were building wasn't just a set of algorithms. It was a revolution. The code I was writing wasn't just functional, it was innovative. It had the potential to transform an entire industry. I gave my all. Every line of code, every test, every update, everything was done with precision. I worked late, almost every day. While Mark and Dylan went to dinners with investors or discussed the big decisions for the company, I was at the office, my coffee cooling beside me, programming. Often I stayed awake until dawn. It was on one of those nights that I finished the first functional version of the system. I remember looking at the computer screen, feeling a wave of satisfaction mixed with a certain fear of the unknown. The system was there, ready to be launched. It was the kind of creation that could change everything. My life, our startup, the industry. That morning I wanted to celebrate. I went to Mark and Dylan, almost eager to see their faces when they saw what I had done. "It's done, guys. It's ready," I said, unable to hide my enthusiasm. Mark looked up from his laptop and smiled, but there was something distant in his eyes. "Excellent, Ethan. I knew you could do it." Dylan, who was usually more effusive, simply nodded. "Now, let's get this moving." That was when everything started to change, although I didn't know it yet. I was so focused on the work, so immersed in the code, that I didn't notice the small signs that I was being pushed aside. They started to drift away, making decisions without consulting me, involving me less in the strategic meetings. "Is everything okay, Ethan?" Dylan asked, feigning concern, in one of the rare times we sat together. "You seem distant." "I'm focused on the code," I replied, not realizing that his words were a way to push me away. Deep down, I still believed in the promise Mark had made. "We're going to be partners 50-50, Ethan." That's what motivated me, the dream of growing together, building something together. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. It all happened quickly, almost cruelly. One day when I was called to a meeting in Mark's office, he and Dylan were there with enigmatic smiles on their faces. "We need to talk," Mark said seriously. "Ethan, you know you were the key to making this happen. But right now, we need to take a new direction." I furrowed my brow. "New direction? What does that mean?" "Dylan and I decided it's better to go forward without you," he said bluntly. "You did your job, but now we need a new direction for the company." The words hit me like a weight. What are you saying, Mark? I'm one of the founders." Dylan tried to calm the situation. "Ethan, understand. It's a strategic move. We're growing, and we need people with management experience. It's not personal. The company needs a new vision now." It was as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. All my confidence, all my dedication, all the energy I had put into that company was reduced to nothing. I was discarded. But before I left the room, Mark looked me in the eyes and said, almost as if trying to justify the betrayal, "Your contribution will be recognized, Ethan. Believe me, you'll understand later." Deep down, I knew it wouldn't be like that. And now all that was left was the emptiness and the desire for revenge. It was a cold autumn morning, the kind of morning that made Colorado seem even more vast with its gray sky and biting winds. But inside the office, everything finally seemed to fall into place. I had just delivered the last update to the system, that crucial component that would change everything, the highly anticipated integration that the investors had been waiting for. Finally, the system was perfect, ready to be launched to the world. It was my work, my code. And now, I expected to be recognized for it. The meeting had been scheduled with an enthusiasm I couldn't fully understand at the time. Mark had that confident smile, the same one he wore when he knew something big was about to happen. Dylan, always with his charismatic demeanor, was by his side, as if it was just another day of celebration. "Let's do this, folks," Mark said, lightly tapping the table as he entered the room. "Ethan, are you ready to take the next step?" That phrase felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. I truly believed that the next step was the partnership Mark had promised me so many times. To me, that meant my name would finally be on the same level as theirs. I would be part of their grand vision of the company's future. I was only 36, and though I had already achieved some incredible things in the tech world, I always believed that at that moment, I was about to experience my big breakthrough. "Of course," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness, as Mark gave me a sharp look. We sat around the table and the atmosphere was thick with a kind of strange anticipation. I knew something important was about to happen, but I had no idea that it would shake me to my core. They had talked about launching our platform to the global market, about attracting major investors, about the revolution we were creating together. Mark paused, looked at me with that enigmatic smile, and then said, in an unusually calm tone, "Ethan, we have something important to discuss." Dylan, sitting beside him, didn't seem as calm. He was fiddling with his phone, maybe to hide the discomfort I couldn't identify at the time. What I realized later was that Dylan was in the middle of something he didn't want me to know. I took a deep breath and said, "I know, you must be excited for the next step, for the investment round. We're finally ready to take our system to market. Now is the time to start working on the expansion, right?" Mark didn't respond immediately. He quickly glanced at Dylan, who continued avoiding my gaze, and then refocused on me. He began to speak, but Mark's voice was softer, more controlled than I had imagined. "Yes, about that, Ethan," he started. "We need a new direction for the company. The truth is, after giving it more thought, we've decided to go in a different direction." Those words hit me like a stone in my stomach. A different direction? I asked, feeling my throat tighten. What do you mean by that? What's going on? Mark glanced at Dylan again before continuing. We're not saying your work hasn't been valuable, quite the opposite. You've done an amazing job. The problem is what we're looking for now isn't exactly what you've created. His words were like sharp knives. I was trying to understand, but the pieces still didn't fit. The shock made my brain spin. What you're saying is, you don't want my work anymore? My voice was low, almost a whisper, trying not to believe what I was hearing. Dylan finally looked at me, but his gaze didn't have the warmth it once did. Ethan, it's not about that. It's not personal. The company needs a new strategy. We need people with more experience in management. We can't just rely on your code anymore. I was starting to understand what was happening, but the pain was still too intense to process. So you're telling me that all my work, the code I built on my own, it doesn't matter anymore? Mark leaned back in his chair, more relaxed than I ever imagined. It's not like that, Ethan. We know your contribution was key to what we are today, but we need a new approach. With the investment round we've secured, we need people with more business vision. I looked at both of them and anger began to boil inside me. I knew something was wrong, something they weren't telling me. The system, my creation, was the reason everything was working, and now suddenly it wasn't enough. Were they throwing away all my work, discarding me like a mere pawn in a chess game? I don't understand, I murmured, my mind trying to process the reality. You used my system, my creation, to attract investors, and now you're telling me I'm not needed anymore? Mark shrugged, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Yes, that's exactly what we're saying, Ethan. It's the nature of business. You can't expect your creation to always be yours. The code was yours, but the rights, well, the rights are ours now. Those words cut like a blade. I knew something was wrong, but hearing that was like a final blow. They had used me to get to where they were, and now they were tossing me aside as if I were a mere tool. I walked out of the room with a lump in my throat, trying to process what had just happened. My feet felt heavy, as if the ground had suddenly thickened. Anger consumed me, but above all, there was a sense of helplessness. I had been deceived, used, and now I was being ignored. The feeling of emptiness took over me. I had never felt so erased in my life. And then, as I walked away, an idea began to form in my mind. A strange, but inevitable thought. If they thought the code was theirs, I would show the world that the true creation had a face. My face. I may be just a name erased now, but the story wasn't over. And I would make them pay for it. After Mark and Dylan discarded me, anger began to take over me in a way I had never imagined. It wasn't just revenge that I wanted. It was justice. And over the following months, I found myself alone in my small office, with nothing but my anger and the sound of my keyboard keys. The rest of the world no longer existed. I was immersed in the silence of a cramped space, between sleepless nights and bitter coffee, architecting my response. What would I do with all that pain, with all that abandonment? How could I turn that into something powerful? It won't be easy, Ethan, I whispered to myself, but you'll do it anyway. I knew what I had to do, but it wasn't just a matter of creating a better system. It wouldn't be just another system. It would be a new way of seeing the world of technology, a remedy for the corruption, manipulation, and greed they represented. I would build something that wasn't just an alternative to what they had done, but a true revolution, a platform that was ethical, transparent, and collaborative. With every line of code I wrote, a part of the pain was transforming into something solid, something real. The sound of the keys clacking in the cold of the night became my music of revenge. It was as if I was venting through the code, pouring all my frustration and desire for retribution into every variable, into every loop. It was late at night when I finally typed the last line of the first functional version. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. There was something there that hadn't existed before. Something new. Something I had created from scratch, with a completely different philosophy. The system will be free, I whispered to myself. Open source, transparent, and collaborative. What I was creating wouldn't just be a platform, it would be a reflection of what I believed to be the future of technology. The idea of software where all data, all transactions, would be visible to anyone. Nothing hidden, nothing concealed. The opposite of what Mark and Dylan had done, using my code without giving me credit, hiding the true workings to deceive investors and users. But it wasn't just the transparency that made my project special. I wanted it to be truly collaborative. Any developer who wanted to improve the system could contribute, and each modification would be validated and openly discussed, without the need for intermediaries. An ecosystem where ethics and justice were the pillars. No lies. No manipulation. With every new line of code I wrote, I felt stronger, more powerful. My mind was creating new paths, new features, while my anger towards my former partners fueled me. I knew they would never imagine what was happening. They thought I was just an erased name, a shadow in their past, but they were about to discover that no one can completely erase the truth. The first version was ready. I needed to launch it. I knew it would be a risk. Who would take a chance on a new platform in a market already saturated with tech giants? But there was something the others didn't have, a clear vision and the confidence that ethics could be the greatest differentiator of all. My platform wouldn't just be a tool, it would be a manifesto. The launch was done with a simple strategy, an online campaign targeting developers and entrepreneurs tired of the old lies of the market. The slogan, "Technology with Purpose." The words resonated and the community began to form. Within a few weeks, forums, social media groups, and even Slack channels were discussing the platform, testing it, contributing. That's how I built a community around it. The code was no longer just mine. It belonged to anyone who wanted to contribute. Meanwhile, the old startup of my former partners began to feel the first effects. I didn't know it yet, but they were starting to get worried. What they didn't see was that, no matter how much they had the advantage of investors and money, I had something they couldn't buy: the trust of the public. The transparency of my platform was attracting people who were beginning to see the true face of the industry. The reaction was immediate. That's when the media started to pay attention. First, a small tech blog reported the launch of the new platform. Then larger sites began comparing it to my former partner's old platform. The discussion spread like wildfire. The press started questioning the ethical impact of technology in the market, and investors began to divide. Those who were on the fence started to look at the ethical platform with more interest, while others, more conservative, tried to discredit it. It was a crucial moment. They were beginning to realize that something was changing. "Ethan, are you seeing this?" Sarah, my friend and one of the first to support the project, asked. She was in charge of marketing, helping to push the platform forward. "Yes, it's happening faster than I expected," I replied with a satisfied smile. "They'll start feeling the pressure." It's not just the press. What's happening now is that investors are starting to split between the two platforms. Some are going to your side, while others still believe the old formula is the best. I laughed softly. They think money is the biggest trump card. They're mistaken. I was beginning to see the impact of what I had created. Investors were starting to have doubts. The old platform, which once seemed invincible, was beginning to lose credibility. My code was shaping something new, something my former partners hadn't been able to predict. A real revolution, one that now had no turning back. With every new developer who joined my project, with every open contribution, with every improvement someone implemented in the platform, I felt as if the world was turning in my favor. I was creating something that, one way or another, would become the backbone of a new generation of software. And I had done it from scratch without anyone's help, without Mark or Dylan's sophistry. At that moment, I knew I was ready for the next step. The process was underway, and the final victory was approaching. I wasn't just creating a platform. I was creating a legacy. And while they were starting to struggle to maintain the facade of the old startup, I was about to show them that true power lay in something they couldn't buy: trust, justice, and ethics. The fall of my former partner's old startup was faster and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. I didn't have to do anything. They dug their own grave, like a child playing with fire. All it took was for the truth to be released. And as they say, the truth has a very peculiar way of spreading, like a contagious disease that won't stop until everything is exposed. What I didn't expect was that the truth would come out faster than I thought. The first spark was ignited by a former employee of the startup, one of many that Mark and Dylan had discarded over the years. This seemed to be a pattern for them, but now, this former employee, who preferred to remain anonymous, had something powerful up his sleeve. Internal documents, falsified reports, and, most devastating of all, clear evidence of metric manipulation to deceive investors. I remember the day I found out. I was in my office reviewing the code for the new version of the platform when my phone rang. It was Sarah, my marketing partner. She sounded visibly shaken, her voice quieter than usual. "Ethan, you need to see this. It's on social media, and also on some big websites. It's what you think it is." I knew, even before opening the link, what that meant. I didn't need to see it to know what was behind it all. The first thought that came to my mind was, revenge will be sweet. With my heart racing, I opened the websites. It didn't take long to see the headlines bursting. Ex-employee leaks documents exposing startup's metric manipulation. Data fraud, how the startup's founders deceived investors and users for years. It was like a punch to the stomach. What had Mark and Dylan done? Manipulated data to make sure investors saw growth that never existed, to ensure the numbers were always optimistic, even though behind the curtains everything was crumbling. What they didn't know, and could never anticipate, was that this lie would become the spark for an unprecedented scandal. The documents were clear. There was no denying it anymore. The media quickly exploded with the story. Interviews, investigations, reports from former employees and dissatisfied customers started appearing on all news platforms. Mark and Dylan's startup, which had once seemed like the big sensation in Silicon Valley, was now being swallowed by an avalanche of scandals. And with each new day, new horrific details emerged, like a pressure cooker about to explode. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said, as we prepared for the impact. "What you've built is blowing up in a way no one expected. They have nowhere to run anymore." It was strange. I felt a kind of satisfaction, but at the same time, a weight in my heart. Nothing I had done was intended to destroy anyone. But what they had done to me, what they had done to my code, the way they discarded me, could not just go unnoticed. And now, they were paying the price for their own greed. Meanwhile, my new platform continued to grow. More and more developers were joining the cause. More and more users were adopting the idea of a transparent, ethical, and collaborative system. My vision of a future without secrets in the heart of the code was finally taking shape. What was once a small idea I launched quietly was now a global movement. People were tired of the lies and wanted something more. With the platform's growth, the media also began to see me in a new light. I was no longer the betrayed programmer. Now, I was the symbol of a new era for technology, an era where transparency and ethics prevailed. I had become the face of change, the spokesperson for tech justice, as many began to call me. I had done it all on my own. They discarded me, but they didn't know that my true strength lay in something they would never understand: the power of building something true, something without masks. It was at a big tech event that the final confrontation between me, Mark, and Dylan happened. It was the kind of event you only see once in a lifetime. Tech giants, investors, thought leaders, all gathered in one space to discuss the future of the industry. I knew this was my chance to make my point, to make it clear that change was happening, and there was no going back. When I walked into the room, my gaze went straight to the section where Mark and Dylan were sitting. They were on stage, as always, with their fake smiles. But something seemed different. Mark was more tense than usual. Dylan didn't have the same sparkle in his eyes that I remembered. They knew they could no longer keep up appearances. I saw them from a distance, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, only a sense of inevitability. They had failed on all levels, and now, in front of everyone, they were about to be exposed. "Ethan!" Mark shouted when he saw me cross the crowd, his tone forced, trying to keep composure. He stood up, a nervous smile on his lips. "Great to see you here. How's it going?" I walked up to them, and the words came out colder than I imagined. "I just wanted to congratulate you, Mark. After all, you really managed to create the most corrupt tech company of the decade." His smile disappeared for a second, and Dylan, who was standing next to him, fell silent, staring at the floor. The atmosphere around us froze. Everyone could hear. No one said anything, but all eyes were on us. "Ethan, now's not the time for this," Dylan said, his voice wavering. "You know the situation isn't what you think. It's all a big misunderstanding." I chuckled softly. "The truth doesn't have misunderstandings, Dylan. The truth is in the documents, which you know very well were leaked. Now everyone knows. Your lie has been exposed, and I'm just watching you fall." The silence in the auditorium was deafening. I was there on stage with the audience looking at me, and I felt as though I was standing before the greatest victory of my life. "You couldn't expect this to go unnoticed," I continued. "Believe me, I'm not the only one who's watching how technology should evolve. I'm just the beginning. The future is in transparency, and that's what we're talking about now." Mark and Dylan exchanged looks, and an indescribable tension filled the air. They were losing. I had won. Not with revenge, but with the one thing they had never been able to understand. The truth. The event went on, but the impact of what I said reverberated for hours, even into the following days. They had no way to deny it anymore. The truth was exposed, and my platform. It was becoming more and more popular, while Mark and Dylan's old startup sank in the scandal. Their collapse wasn't caused by me. It was caused by them. The truth, once again, had prevailed. The room was quiet. All eyes were on me, watching every movement, waiting for the next word, the next reaction. The investigations had been done, the evidence had surfaced, and the pieces were finally falling into place. I could see in Mark and Dylan's eyes the growing desperation, but also a surprise that would soon turn into fear. They thought they had defeated me. They believed that by firing me and erasing my name from the startup's history, they had closed the chapter of Ethan. But the truth is that I had always been one step ahead. I knew what they would do. I knew exactly what they were capable of doing. And when I wrote the first line of code, when I created that system, I left a seed there. A piece of code that only I knew existed. I watched them closely, almost with a smile, and then I spoke calmly. "You think you betrayed me, but in reality, you were playing in my game all along. Because when I wrote that system, I left something that no one could erase, not even you." There was an absolute silence in the air. The words fell like a bomb in the center of the room. "What kind of game are you talking about, Ethan?" Mark asked, his voice tense, trying to maintain the facade. He stood up from his chair, a nervous movement. "Are you trying to intimidate us now?" I looked at him with a terrifying calm. "It's not intimidation, Mark. It's simply a fact, a line of code that no one but me knew was there, and that no one, not you, not Dylan, nor anyone else, could ever remove. You think you erased my history? You think you deleted my work? No. What you never understood is that, inside that system, there was something that only I could access. Something that at the right moment would become the irrefutable proof that the code was mine." Dylan stepped forward, his eyes wide. "What are you saying? You're saying that you put something in the code, and that this catches us? That's impossible. It's not possible." I leaned slightly forward. What I was about to reveal was something that neither they nor the media had even imagined. Something that would completely change the narrative. Something that would turn the game in my favor in a way they could never foresee. I left something else in the code, Dylan, I said, each word heavy with the weight of the revelation. An authentication line, a ghost authentication as I like to call it. It was there on purpose. Not to harm the platform or the company, but as protection. A moral protection, to be exact. They looked at me as if I were crazy, but the truth began to fall on them like a heavy curtain that no one could lift. That line of code was a simple verification mechanism that proved the system was my creation, even if the name was erased. Even if the code was manipulated, modifying functions and interfaces, that line was there to ensure that at the right time, I would be able to prove that the system was mine. The room fell silent. I knew they were trying to understand what this meant, but the truth was already in the air. They could no longer backtrack. "This is impossible," Mark exclaimed. "You're saying that this line was hidden in the code from the very beginning? But how?" I gave a small smile, but without pride. What was happening was deeper than that. I wasn't there to flaunt my superiority, but to show that ethics, truth, and purpose could not be erased so easily. It was a simple line, Mark. It did nothing but authenticate my authorship. It didn't interfere with the system's functionality. But when you tried to erase my signature from the code, it revealed itself. When you manipulated the metrics, it activated and gave me access. And it was this line that allowed me, today, to prove legally that that system was created by me. Not by you. Not by Dylan. Dylan stepped back, looking like he was losing his composure for the first time since I'd seen him. His arrogance, that unwavering confidence, was beginning to crumble. "This is an abomination. You couldn't have done this," he tried to argue, but his voice faltered. "I didn't do anything illegal, Dylan. I did what any programmer would do if they knew they were pouring their soul into code that could someday be stolen. I put in protection to ensure that in the future, the truth would always come to light. I wrote that code with purpose, and in the end, it always found a way to come back." As Mark and Dylan tried to process what was happening, a sense of victory filled me. It wasn't just any victory. It was the victory of ethics, of truth, and of the power to create with purpose. They thought they had won, that they had erased me from the startup's history, but what they didn't realize was that the code, the real code, would never lie. "Now justice will be done," I continued calmly. "I filed the lawsuit, and with this proof, I've won. I never wanted things to end this way, but I couldn't let what was mine be stolen with impunity. I'm no better than anyone, but I believe that in the end, the code, the real code, will always reveal itself." The room was in a deep silence now. I could see in their eyes the frustration and helplessness. With every word I spoke, the truth hit them harder. They couldn't escape it. They couldn't change the fact that in trying to destroy my creation, they had dug their own grave. I stood up from the chair and, looking at Mark and Dylan, said with a calmness only I knew how to maintain, "Code is like a soul. It can't be bought, it can't be stolen, it can't be destroyed. If you write it with truth, with purpose, it always finds a way to come back." The silence after my words was deafening. Mark and Dylan were paralyzed, speechless, as the reality of their defeat finally began to settle in. And, as they sank deeper into their own arrogance and corruption, I looked around the room, at those who were there, watching it all. They knew they were witnessing what could be the birth of a new era in technology, the era of truth. And in that moment, all I wanted was for people to see the true power of creating with integrity, with ethics, and with purpose. The future of technology would no longer be controlled by those willing to lie, manipulate, and steal. The future lay in something purer, more transparent, and I was just getting started.